afternoon, everybody. You join us again on a very cold, windy afternoon in Harare. It hasn't been a kind weather for the last 2 weeks. I think you know when you made that comment that it's gonna get better, it actually got worse. Yeah,
the solstice,
we should never listen
the winter
to
solstice.
Yeah, I don't buy that at all. But welcome everybody. This is bound to be one of our best shows because we've got somebody very special. Doug, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, Mofu.
Mofu. Yeah, Mofu Mkono. All right. They believe that they're the rulers of this nation.
But, well...
Do you subscribe to that?
I think we're the original inhabitants from the north.
Wow. You know, Chikvedero will dispute that, but
no,
we'll get into that.
He confirms that.
Oh, Chikvedero confirms it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. We'll get into that.
Except that he wants the so-called to have been there too.
There you go.
Well, what I can say with high conviction is that the country, as of now, is being run by a Shumba.
Well, that's true. Doug is a distinguished actuary, the first Zimbabwean trained actuary. So this was in the early 80s.
No, it was in the 90s.
Or in the 90s.
Yes.
Yeah. He's also the CEO of FML, one of the larger insurance companies and assurance companies in Zimbabwe, First Mutual Life. And we're going to discuss a number of issues that you guys have raised. Primarily, we're going to talk about the insurance and pensions industry, just the past, the history, and how we got here. Lots of questions around that. But what makes Doug even more distinguished is he was the founding chairman of the Zimbabwe Statistical Office. Then it was called the Statistical Office.
Yeah, we founded the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agents out of the Central Statistical Office, which was a department in the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, so fantastic. And we're going to talk about that because now its constitutional mandate is actually separate from the Ministry of Finance. And we're going to get into the details and we're going to understand the numbers as well. And which is great because, he founded it, he was part of it, but now he's a subscriber to its data and he uses the data on a day-to-day basis. So if there's anyone that one would have wished for to talk about the insurance industry and the investment industry, this is perhaps the best candidate. What do you think, Shumba?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. And he's also a remarkable corporate executive in that he's been quite entrepreneurial in the businesses that he's run. For example, First Mutual Life has a health business that didn't exist until he went back there to be CEO, and he built it from scratch, and it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, medical insurance business in the country.
Okay, fantastic. Maybe you can take us through what you are actually having today. That's a large bottle for one man.
Well, hopefully I'll persuade Mofu to join me later because this whiskey is fit for a king. It's made by the 16 men of Tain, Lemorangi, the Dutak, and I've never had it before, but I have high conviction that it will be one of the better ones.
We shall know by the end of the evening.
Indeed.
I'm having a jasmine tea. It's a green tea.
You're very lucky to be having tea since you're late again today.
The producer. Yeah, he was jumping up and down. So you know what I did? I just turned off my phone and I just floored the car. But I'm here. And what are you having, Doug?
My tea is amazing.
Oh, there we go.
Local is like a...
Local is like a...
Yeah, but it's not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Yeah, so we could look at options.
All right, fantastic. Here's a guy who likes writing and subscribing to options. Fantastic. Okay, so that's enough of the mollycoddling. So now we're actually going to go into the hard, no holds barred. And what we're going to start off with is a report that was done just after the hyperinflation, the first hyperinflation, bout of hyperinflation, which is in 2008, then Justice George Smith, there was a commission of inquiry that was done, and they produced 444 pages, which I had to comb through before we actually started this, because I think there were a number of issues that were raised, and I think the insurance industry defended themselves, but they also looked at a number of factors that had actually affected the pensions industry. And the big question there was on loss of value. A lot of pensioners actually lost value. But because of the way the insurance industry and the pension industry was actually structured, I think one may perhaps not blame from a legal perspective. You can't fault the insurance companies and the pension funds. I would not want to get into the legal perspective. But the big question that came out was more an ethical question around the insurance industry. And I'm just laying the land before you answer, because I want you to be very clear about what the issue is. And the real issue is what happened between 1999 to 2001, where there was massive demutualization that occurred. And it was driven from South Africa, which was a good thing to do then. We had never suffered hyperinflation. But post that, with the bout of hyperinflation, and with this distinction that you had shareholders' funds and then you had the contributors' pool, post hyperinflation, the shareholders seemed to have managed hyperinflation, but the pensioners did not manage to hyperinflation well. That's the context.
Okay.
More from an ethical perspective rather than from a legal perspective.
All right, maybe we can start by, you talked about demutualization, so I think it's quite important to just put that into perspective. Demutualization happened in Zimbabwe. There were two mutual societies, Old Mutual and First Mutual. And Old Mutual went for it first, which was concluded in 1999, and First Mutual came in 2002, 2003. Now, and this mainly applies to life assurance companies, where the policyholders contribute into a society. The society had no real owners. The members owned everything. The biggest motivation for demutualization was the fact that as the world became more turbulent in terms of capital management, clients were not expected to answer a capital call. So if you were running a mutual society and you needed new capital, who was going to give you the money? If you could not go to the 500,000 policyholders of Old Mutual or the 250,000 policyholders of First Mutual and ask them to put money. So it became imperative to separate clients from owners.
Mm-hmm.
In the process that was to say that you have this amount of money, which is meant to support the business's capital in one end, and the other bit to give the benefits to the members. The typical split between those two was about 80-20. Okay. 20% of the money to 25% was meant to support his capital. 75 to 80% to pay the benefits. So on day one of demutualization, the policyholders were the 100% shareholders of the company, but they were given options, but they never intended to own it. They just wanted to buy their policies, to either receive cash or to become shareholders, and they were issued shares. So in terms of the split of the assets, it was an even split by class, by category. If you had 10 in property, 8 went to the policyholders, 2 went to the shareholder fund, the new shareholder fund, because it was one person on day one.
Yes.
The same happened to the money market assets, shares, and so on. So at the time of split, there was an even distribution. And it had to go through the process of approval by the regulators, starting with an independent actuarial report, and the approval by the Minister of Finance to do that. So that happened. So by the close of 2003, there was no longer any society in Zimbabwe. There was First Mutual Life Assurance Company, Old Mutual Life Assurance Company, with policyholders owning roughly 80% of the assets, and capital being 20% of the assets.
Okay. So let's just stick to that for a bit.
Yes.
So if you look at the Justice Smith report, there was an allegation, and I will use the allegation. There was one allegation against Old Mutual, but there's one specifically against First Mutual. So I'll use the one against First Mutual. That the basis in which you're doing it was based on 1996 to 1999 values, and apparently First Mutual, the underlying values had not been audited. That's in the Smith.
Yeah, that allegation is obviously unfounded. You ought to say to yourself, could you run a company that is regulated by the Insurance Commission and not do an audit? Actually, as for First Mutual, it was held in annual general meetings as a society every year, every single year, to approve the accounts. So the accounts of First Mutual Life Assurance Society were audited every single year.
Okay.
And it went to a meeting of its members as a society to get them approved, to get the board fees approved, to get the audit fees approved, to get the directors approved. And in such a meeting, the auditors were there, the regulator, which was the Minister of Finance then, was also there. So I don't know how someone can claim that it was based on an audited account. That is...
Okay, so to be specific and factual, I'm going to read out the statement. It says, First Mutual Life Assurance, First Mutual, which was the second largest insurer in 1996, did not provide the Commission with the total asset figures for the period 1996 to 2006 to 2003, the period prior to its demutualization in 2003. Furthermore, First Mutual asset values for the period 2006 to 2008 were excluded in the computation of the industry's total assets, as they were abnormally high and distorted. The values submitted for this period were about 1,000 times larger than that of the whole industry's total assets. So consequently, it was very difficult to judge what the impact of hyperinflation was when you looked at First Mutual.
Okay, I think I can see the problem you're getting yourself into.
Okay.
Let's talk about whether or not the accounts were audited up to 1996 and 2003. I think that is not what they're talking about.
Okay.
When the Justice Smith Commission was instituted, it called for data from industries, and they received data. So their allegation is that they don't believe they received all the data from First Mutual. It's quite different from saying that there were no audits.
Okay.
So let's get this out of the way.
Okay.
Then we'll go to the next point, which says the values were too high. That's what I'm hearing, if I got you right.
So there are two parts.
Yes.
So there's the 1996 to 1999, and then there's the data that then was provided from 2006 to 2009.
Yeah, okay. Let's start with the 1996 2003, which is
Yes.
the prior to demutualization.
Yes.
The claim was that the accounts were not audited, and they've just dealt with that.
Yes, you've
they
dealt
were
with that.
audited, and that data was given to them. That's why they're talking about it.
Okay.
If they had not received it, they would not have been claiming that it's an audited or all this. So they did receive it.
Okay.
And by the way, through all that period, First Mutual Life Assurance Society then also produced actuarial evaluations every year, and the Justice Smith Commission received the same. The actuary at that time was R. Watson and Sons, a London-based actuarial firm which had an office. That was the statutory actuary which valued the business until about 1998. Then the actuary became Deloitte.
Okay. I'm glad you pick up that on the actuary society.
So those numbers were provided
For.
to IPEC and to the Justice Smith Commission. If they a misunderstanding of them, that could be a completely different matter. But clearly the numbers were provided.
Okay. Thanks for that, because you actually give us the next question, which is around the Justice Smith had very nasty things to say actually about the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe, as well as IPEC as a regulator, that the IPEC, and this is what they say, IPEC failed to initiate and champion measures to protect policyholders and pension fund values, and also failed to provide guidance to the industry during the periods of hyperinflation. Then the second allegation against the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe is at the time of conversion, the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe do not have the capacity to provide any guidance on the conversion process. The society did not regulate its members as expected, effectively placing the obligation on the external professional bodies such as the Institute of blah, 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 blah. But they're saying it's a failure.
Let me deal with that. I actually love it.
Okay.
But I will start with the actuarial profession.
All right, yeah. Of which you remember.
Yes. So, I'm also a
And that puts him in a much higher IQ class than you and me.
I'm also a past president of the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And a lecturer in actuarial science in the university in Bulawayo. So a number of the actuaries in the market are my former students. But let's do first things first.
Yes.
Members of the actuarial profession in Zimbabwe were very few qualified actuaries.
Okay.
So if you want to regulate a profession, you need a significant number of people to avoid the situation where if there are 5 guys, one of them commits misconduct, it's the 5 friends trying to deal with it. So even as of today, the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe does not have enough fellow members to be able to have its own code of conduct. By our qualification, I will speak for myself, I am a member of the Institute Faculty of Actuaries of the United Kingdom and a member of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. Fellow member. The reason for that is that if I should do anything of a professional misconduct, the concerned parties can raise it with a bigger board of actuaries who will be able to investigate me and put me to discipline. If you have 4 or 5 guys creating a regulatory authority among themselves, you know what the outcome will be. So I won't go into that. So that's the first part.
Okay. Then IPEC.
No,
Still with
yes.
Okay.
Did the Actuarial Society give guidelines on how to do a conversion? Yes, it did.
Okay.
I wrote that personally, so I can talk about it.
All right, fantastic. Let's do it.
So, we should not confuse what the real problem was between the method of sharing assets and the quantum of the assets. I wrote a guideline as the senior actuary, discussed with other actuaries who practicing, discussed it with the insurance regulator, and we were of the view that in terms of distributing the assets that were there, it was reasonable.
Okay.
But the method of distributing assets does not increase or decrease the amount of assets, which is where I think the commissioners misdirected themselves, respectfully. Because I will go into that as we go in the process.
Yeah.
As for IPEC, protecting members or guiding the industry, I beg to differ.
Okay.
IPEC's role is to make sure that people are complying with the Insurance Act, which they did. They never found anyone violating the Pensions and Provident Funds Act or the Insurance Act. But IPEC does not give members a protection against the vagaries of the economy. It's not their role. Okay. In fact, by implementing its mandate, IPEC contributed to the loss of value because members of pension funds are required to invest 50% of their assets in monetary assets in government bonds. If you didn't do that, you were not compliant. And IPEC vigorously enforced that, and people complied. You all know what happened to monetary assets. We shall not go into that.
What's your view?
No, I completely agree. I think that the biggest culprit in terms of the value destruction of savings and pensions was hyperinflation itself, and these very rules that forced people managing that money to place half of it in radioactive Zim dollar securities. So that's where the value, the way I think about it is what happened was a massive wealth transfer from people who had savings in pensions to the state. And it's remarkable that people want to point the finger at the insurance businesses when it's clear that the state is the one that destroyed the value.
So the next question I'm gonna
maybe let's carry on with this a bit.
Right.
So For IPEC as the insurance regulator, they could not have done anything else to protect investors. Maybe I need to point out what the core purpose of sparing consumption today in order to consume in the future.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, how did we come to conclude that? It's a fundamental point in economics that there's going to be a positive real rate of return into the future. So if that axiom, as we call it in mathematics, falls away, there's no need to invest. It's a waste of time. We all know it. So we have had various thoughts about this could have been, you could have done this, you could have done this, but the fundamental thing is that you invest in an economy. And an economy is a mixture of parameters that drive what is going on. So to the extent that your dollar today cannot increase higher than the rate of inflation, it's a waste of time investing it. So if you look at the period under review, where the inflation reached quite quintillions, and the returns were never even in billions, there was an instantaneous, continuous destruction of value, which made no sense of investment. Even in those asset classes that try to maintain value like equities and real estate, their rate of growth was way far below the rate of inflation.
Fantastic, because you've walked right in to the question, the ethical question that I originally wanted to ask, but that was the background. So the ethical question is this. If indeed hyperinflation was going to destroy, and you guys were the investment managers, when you were going to your contributors, you were telling them that you were the experts. You could beat hyperinflation. You knew what to do to beat hyperinflation. Because if indeed you knew that there was no reason to invest because you were not able to beat hyperinflation, was it not the best time to actually tell contributors that actually I don't think we're ethically possible to preserve value? You're better off keeping your money or being honest. Because when you were going around companies, when you're going around your contributors, you were telling them that you are the experts. You know how best to go around us.
Okay, thank you. I think you got to split that into two parts.
Okay.
In economics, they say ceteris paribus, all things being equal.
Yes.
So there was a point when fund managers, insurance companies would say, we'll provide you with a real rate of return. They did not talk about hyperinflation. So we need to separate ordinary market dynamics and the extraordinary market dynamics.
Yeah.
When the hyperinflation came, the significant players in the industry, including First Mutual, but in particular Old Mutual, culled certain products. They refused to take money from people and actually paid them back their money. They said, we can no longer afford, we can't make this work for you. Please come and get your money. Some of the members didn't come. What continued working was a pension contribution, which is largely a contractual relationship between the employer and the employee. And the pension fund continued to exist. One could say on the other side, perhaps we should have said to the employers, don't give us the contributions, give your employees cash. Maybe they can help themselves. But in terms of products, all the investment products, that investment illustration with what we call the BIA, the Benefit Illustration Agreement, we actually culled. Because you could, what would happen is when you're selling a policy, you say to somebody, if the investment return is 8% per annum, well, this is your estimated maturity value. When the inflation came and we could no longer sustain that, we were required by the insurance regulator and by our own ethical means to advise the members. And a number of those products were actually removed from the shelf of products and offer, and payouts were made even before some of the value has been lost too much.
Okay.
Some of the members, unfortunately, did not come to take their money, although they were advised. And when the hyperinflation ended, when the dollar came, they came looking for their money and they were told that there's only 20 cents left or there's $50 left. So there are no ethical issues arising from giving bad advice of pretending to preserve value in hyperinflation. The trouble with this commission of inquiry is that, for example, I was the one who did most of the conversions. They never bothered to interview me. I solicited to be interviewed and they did it. Because they obviously did not stomach the idea of hearing what they didn't want to hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, on the ethical issue, the reason why I started with mutualization
Yes.
is because there are people who ordinarily were contributing members, but they're not sophisticated. They don't know what ceteris paribus means. They don't know what hyperinflation means.
Yeah.
We had never suffered hyperinflation.
Yeah.
But what happened with demutualization was you then separated assets where you had shareholders and then you had the contributors. But by that very factor, what would tend to happen is before demutualization, so this is a counterfactual point, do you think that value would have been more sustained if demutualization had not happened, so it was one, and then you had hyperinflation? Because then the shareholders and the contributors' funds, they were one. The mindset was one.
No.
Whereas the separation, the guy was ignorant, was obviously going to suffer. And then shareholders would naturally preserve their value.
No, actually, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is often the confusion when you have these kind of things. The shareholders have a direct interest in the success of the policyholders. They are their clients. If you don't have clients, you have no business. So there is no conflict of interest between the shareholders and policyholders. If anything, there's a commonality of interest. But let's go to the actual effect of the investments. The assets are invested in the same investment medium. So it's not like the shareholders were owning assets on Mars and the policyholders were owning assets on Earth. They were all invested in the Zimbabwean economy. If it was a bond, it's a bond both for the shareholders and the policyholders. If it's a stock on the ZSC, it's a stock both for the shareholders and the policyholders. If it's a property, the same.
Okay.
So I cannot imagine why somebody would then allege that the shareholders emerged better post-demutualization. The only difference that would come is, insofar as pure pension funds, not life assured, the insured pension funds, the policyholders and the shareholders invested in a similar way, it's an actual requirement of asset and liability matching. Because your capital that you need must match your liabilities. In pension funds that were not in the insurance companies, there was no shareholder. So because people tend to think that everybody, there were shareholders all of. So when you look at this matter, you must be careful. The largest pension funds in Zimbabwe don't have shareholders. So the matter of shareholders benefit doesn't arise. And I'll mention them too. NRZ, mining industry, all the state enterprises, ZESA, PTC, you name them, the big funds, they are no shareholder funds. They were never demutualized, but they lost value, nevertheless, because they were invested in an environment that was not conducive to preservation of value. So the attack on shareholders is narrow-minded in believing that all the pension funds in Zimbabwe were shareholders. In fact, actually, even some of the recommendations from this report say that shareholders must put money. Then I say to you, if you are talking about NRZ pension fund, you're simply saying the government must write a check. But there are no shareholders.
Yes.
So there is no difference. At the close of the hyperinflation period, I looked at both Old Mutual and First Mutual. The relationship between the assets belonging to shareholders and policyholders was still 80-20
Okay.
in value. And that is verifiable information because it's in the accounts.
Okay.
So there's no chance that the shareholders came better off. They were invested in exactly the same way as the policyholders. By the requirement of matching assets and liabilities, which is an actuarial process, if you have this type of asset backing the liabilities, you need this similar type of asset backing the capital. And it went out. But in the non-shareholder space, the losses were bigger because 50% of the entire portfolio was invested in government bonds. And you know what happened? So at the start, just by dealing with the monetary assets alone, you would have known that at the end of hyperinflation, 50% of the assets were already missing. Before you went anyway. They were already missing.
So you saying that subsequently
Yes.
to 2008, we've now had hyperinflation again. And subsequent to that, government bonds right now are issued at 18%. So everything that you've warned us, you seem to be warning us again that, guys, if you're putting your money in pension funds, just know that there's nothing there. Because we're
Well,
forced to
if it's
invest.
in Zim dollars, if it's in US dollars, I think it's a different proposition.
Okay.
Yeah, well, let's just stick to Zim dollars because
Yeah.
it is a currency.
I
of
can
use at
I
the
can
moment.
answer that.
Yeah.
The post-dollarization, I remember having a Minister of Honorable Chinamas, in Honorable Beach, who was Minister of Finance, and we said we don't want to buy prescribed assets. We are very clear on record if they are in monetary form. That's when the government listened and said, okay guys, can you create prescribed assets that we will approve that can preserve value? That was the beginning of alternative investments. And you know today that there are many such funds where you can put your money, even in Zim dollars, into a property fund, which is in a prescribed asset, into companies like Mangwana Opportunities Fund, which were the first subscribers. They're investing in real assets. In their prescribed assets, we are minimizing our exposure to monetary assets as a deliberate plan. All the fund managers you talk with today are doing that. But there's a point when if the government demands that you must buy a bond, we go to buy it. But they are flexible now. Even Honorable Mtulungule said, guys, come. If you go into infrastructure, if you go and build a road, if you go and build a school, you own it, but it will preserve your value. So we are doing that.
Okay.
We are not asking our members to buy bonds as they were in the past. And if you look at the portfolios of companies that are managing assets, they do have those prescribed assets. The trouble is the contributions are now much smaller than what they were in the past. So building up a big asset base is taking time. Why? Because with the uncertainty around and the once bitten twice side concept in the minds of people, the contribution to pension funds is actually very small in Zimbabwe in relation to the earnings of the people. So you will find that at a typical company, if you use $2,000 equivalent of money, US dollars and US mixed, maybe only a quarter of that is what is contributing to pension. The rest is paid in allowances and other form of
non-pensionable remuneration,
yes.
basically.
So the bigger issue now is that the money going into investment for retirement or long-term service is small.
Okay.
In fact, we often make this issue for people to understand why their pension contribution is low. Because when they have retired, they say, my pension can't pay for my medical aid. It's too little. When they are working, their contribution to pension is lower than their contribution to medical aid. But they expect that when they have retired, the pension can pay the medical aid.
Okay, so Rufaro, you're an analyst. From what has happened in the past and 3 bouts of hyperinflation, would you still trust the pension industry?
The short answer,
do you think that this is...
I think the short answer to your question is no. And I think just interacting with people who own and run formal businesses, when they look at that line item in their expense accounts, that pension contribution, they think about it as a tax. They don't actually think that there's going to be savings on the other end of this thing. It's a statutory requirement if you run a business that employs a certain number of people for you to actually have a pension fund. And like Mofu indicated, a lot of the companies structure the remuneration of the employees in a manner that minimizes the contribution to pensions as much as possible. And that's really just an indictment on the macroeconomic environment and our capacity to make formal investments. So what employers are really saying to their staff is that, look, you can't trust the money managers and the pension funds. You need to make a plan as an individual.
So I come back to you, because I'm also of that view, and the market is of that view. What is the industry going to do to change this mindset?
Okay, yeah. I think that, first of all, let me acknowledge what you guys are saying. Because before you resolve any matter, you must first of all accept that it's a problem. We often have the denial syndrome. I would be saying to you, oh no, people still like pensions very much and so on. That is untrue. So what you have said is actually factual. I think it's a journey by demonstrable examples of value creation, innovative ways of delivering value to members. And one of the issues I've talked about just now is that it will take time to restore the confidence. Hence, the fact that pension contributions are lower than medical aid costs if somebody is working. So they don't look to getting a pension right now. It's a ritual. So how do we deal with it? It's both a political and a technical matter.
Let's get into it.
It's the same thing as saying, why are people rejecting Zim dollars? So I will start from there. Because the Zimbabweans don't believe that if they save their money to be there tomorrow with an institution. In general, it's a fact, and we must just have to face that. So the only way for that to happen is for a demonstrable stability period where people can receive the real benefits from their funds, even on a small level, something predictable.
As an actuary, do you have a time period? What's a demonstrable period in which you can say, you know what, I think...
It's a function of political will.
Okay.
We've had what I call a step function behavior of economic fundamentals, where a step function is like going up the steps like this.
Yeah.
So you have a rise, then you have a leveling off, then you have a rise, then you have a leveling off. So if we would maintain this leveling off thinking, like if you talk of today, we have a stabilization, even a gaining of value by the Zim dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know why? Yes, we do. The government decided to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
If those things are done consistently, it will take a short period, maybe 4 or 5 years, for people to start believing in this.
Okay.
But
So
if
you
we
are looking
continue
at
to have
4
a
or 5
step
years.
function, if we continue to have a step function, up, level, up, level, up, the confidence will not build. That is the matter. So we got to have, somebody must know that if I have $2 million now, in December I can still buy what I wanted to buy with it. Then there will be the belief. But more importantly, I think we should from an industry, it's not the government alone, from an industry point of view, we should be able to deliver other forms of economic value to our members.
Yeah, that's the technical bit. What would you do?
For example, let's create prescribed assets that will give the opportunity to get jobs, to get stands instead of houses, because their money is too little to buy a house, but they can buy a stand.
Yeah.
Something that they can touch, not all of them, but some of them, because you need ambassadors of that new thinking.
Fantastic, because, you know, lots of people want medical aid, clearly.
Yes.
Right? And they can't afford it when they're
Yes.
old age because they didn't contribute to your pension fund.
Yeah.
But you have state hospitals right now
Yes.
that are in a dilapidating state. And you, as the pension fund industry, why haven't you come in there and you say to government, you know what, these hospitals, I think we can come in because it's our members who are going to use these facilities. We can come in and we can create a hospitable environment at Pare, at Harare, at all these regional hospitals. And your members will be able to use those hospitals. Instead of creating, you know, new facilities, the greater part of people who contribute use public hospitals.
Yeah, well, you've raised an interesting point. Never mind, there's no connection with the pension schemes things you're talking about. But it's a relevant matter. In the hierarchy of needs, health is on the highest. Because a sick person can complain. If you die, you can't complain. So, yeah. So, I think from a health fund point of view, I'm speaking for FMHL health, it's much cheaper for us if the government hospitals were working. The cost of delivery reduces.
Yes.
Because not everybody needs to be in the Avenues clinic.
Absolutely.
Because you have this contradiction that somebody lives in Epworth or somewhere. If they are a member of your medical aid and they've joined the private hospital scheme, they might stay in the hotel Avenues for some days when they are sick. So, is that a good idea? That is not.
No.
They could be using their money for better things and paying a lower contribution going to the nearest clinic. So what are we doing about that? We have started to collaborate with the local authorities, with the government. For example, I can talk about the Zororo Hospital, which you all know. It is Harare Hospital, or Salim Gabi, which we have just refurbished. It's first mutual. And we look at the point of health delivery. We believe that our members in the western suburbs of Harare, Highfield, Glenview, Glenora, and other people in the public domain will be able to access that hospital. It's manned more by nurses than doctors. The doctors are nearby at the bigger hospital. But the common health issues, people don't need all that.
Absolutely.
So we believe that that's a valid point. It could be a way, for example, for pension funds, if they were to invest in that and their members get in there and get a discount, they can start feeling the value.
Absolutely.
So I'm completely sold on that.
So Rufaro, what other innovative things do you think that the industry could do? Because it's very important. We're going to get into the economics of it outside of just the pension industry, but the economics, why it's very important to have a bigger pool of savings. But what could the industry do?
Yeah, look, I think, I've got this pet peeve, and I've mentioned it many times, that one of my gripes with the business community is we don't articulate how economic policy could lead to much better outcomes loudly enough. Because I think a lot of people in business think that criticizing policy action is actually getting political when it's not. And I think one of the fantastic things that the insurance industry has done is to make that case to government that prescribed assets should be more than just monetary assets. You should be able to invest in a project that has assets that are physical, like alternative investments, and still have prescribed asset status, so that if we have another challenge with hyperinflation, or where monetary assets lose value, the pension funds are not hammered again, because the prescribed assets that they are holding actually preserve value. So I think you guys have done a really good job in terms of in terms of the engagement with the authorities, to get them to move the world of prescribed assets to include non-monetary assets. And I think, everybody else in business should learn from that example, that actually it's possible to engage government and say this policy doesn't make sense or isn't working, and get them to make changes.
Okay, so I'm going to push back from both of you a bit, because there's something I want to drive to, because I think we're skirting around the issue. Because if municipal authorities and the government authorities were issuing out bonds that offered a positive rate of return, then you would not need to get into prescribed assets. Then you, as a fund manager, you would just pick up the TB or the municipal bond that's offering a positive rate of return. In fact, it's much easier for you, because this idea of you now going in and ensuring that actually there is a road or actually there is a hospital. We have municipal hospitals, and if municipal hospitals were well run, and this is the financing, and if government TBs was not at 18% today, but was offering a positive rate of return, then people would just pick up those assets. And they would not even need to be 50% prescribed assets.
Okay, yes. In fact, by the way, in many jurisdictions, particularly the OECD countries, government stocks are a high quality asset. The US Treasury is a good example. Everybody buys US Treasuries. In the UK, they used to be called gilt-edged stock, but they were seen as very sharp and nice. The Her Majesty borrowings. So, if indeed the government of Zimbabwe today issues a bond with the right features, we are on record as saying the government, some of our members are contributing US dollars. Can you issue a US dollar bond? We'll buy it. That is not in doubt. You don't even you will not persuade anyone.
Absolutely.
You might run short of stock as people are trying to buy that. So I don't think there's a doubt. But I kind of feel that you are mixing what we have done. You asked what we have done to protect our members.
Yeah, no, we have already moved from
and
that.
We lobbied to Rufaro Butt at that point to say we don't want monetary assets. But we did not end there. We caused the government to pass a law that says pension funds can invest offshore to manage country risk.
Okay. How much can they invest?
Up to 15% of their assets. The problem now is that we don't seem to have enough foreign currency in the country. But I can assure you that we did, when the window opened, and some of the big players did buy deposit receipts of the African Bank, which is domiciled in Mauritius, and we hold them in US dollars, and they've shown the resilience. The share price went down, but the value has sort of remained okay. The dividends are good. There's also the TDB deposit receipts as well of the PTA Bank. So it's a process that is unfolding as an effort to try and protect policyholders. But we would be saying to government, if you want us to build a road, we don't want to own it. Because that was saying we're putting $0, the road is ours, we won't give it to you until there's a stable environment. That's what we are saying.
Okay.
Yeah, so we continue to own the road. We own the invest buildings that we're building because in them we see the value for our members. But when there is stability that I was talking about, we don't need to own those things. We can transfer them to the right place and we get issued with a more stable asset. But along the way, we've got to hold on to something to avoid what happened in the past.
Okay, all right, fantastic. I think we've dealt with that issue quite convincingly. We have to move on,
Sure.
because I know we've got limited time. So now we're going to talk about Zimstats. This is the statistical office and the numbers that they're producing. I must say kudos to them. They seem now to be producing GDP numbers on a quarterly basis. Never mind whatever number that's there, we can always make our own adjustments. But the fact that they're actually coming out to the market, I think it's a good thing. But the first thing I want to read is the constitutional framework between Zimstats and Treasury, and I will get into why that is an issue that we need to understand. But because you were part of, when it was still part of the Ministry of Finance, maybe you can just give us the heydays.
Okay,
what
fine.
you guys were trying to do.
The enabling legislation is the Census and the Statistics Act. That is the law that forms Zimstat. Previously, it was the Central Statistical Office as a department in the Ministry of Finance. But in line with the Board and Trades, the government of Zimbabwe passed the Zimstat Act, which created a statutory board, a parastatal, if you like, outside government, to give it more independence in terms of what it does and to compare it with other international players, because there is the African Association of Statistics, there's the global, to which Zimstat is a member. So that is the basis of it. So Zimstat should just do the work of calculating what the figures are and say them. They don't have to, it's none of their business what they mean, they just do it.
They just do it. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Then recently we saw an SI coming from the president, but on the instigation of Treasury, where they forced new numbers to come out of Zimstats under this blended inflation.
It's not the first time, actually.
Yeah, in 2019 again, they came.
Yeah, when I was still on the board of Zimstat, we had 6 months where we were not producing month-on-month inflation. We were having this debate with our parent, the Minister of Finance.
But you're no longer a parent. You no longer have a parent.
No, every partner is a parent.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. They do have parents. So I personally don't think that is of much value to you. A blended inflation is a complex thing. The hypothesis is that the 70% of the goods are bought in US dollars and 30% are bought in Zim dollars. So if it was up to me, I would have the Zim dollar inflation and the US inflation and work it together to calculate the blend. So because
you would have 3 inflation rates.
Yeah, but what do the people want to know but that's where the government comes in. But government will be saying people are spending in a 70-30 ratio, so they need to do the blended. So the blended is not a guess. I'm getting to my point.
Okay.
The blended is actually a calculation of those two. I actually get, if I want to, the actual inflation by currency. I can get them because they are there.
So why are they not giving it?
The government in its own wisdom. So it's a Zimstat issue. Zimstat calculates inflation in Zim dollars, in US dollars, it's blended. But their principal said, we just publish the blended, but from their point of view, the economy is 70% in US dollars and 30% in Zim dollars. So a real measure of inflation is around those weights. Okay. That is a debatable matter. The normal standard procedure is to calculate inflation per currency.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what people should be asking for, the public, because this is a public good, it's consumed by the public, is a Zim dollar inflation on its own and the US dollar inflation on its own. The trouble in Zimbabwe is, as Faro has said, the users of those figures tend to take a political slant. They use it to interpret political events, not to use it as a measure of economic events. So if you're a politician, you can decide to say, okay, this is what I want you to present it in this form.
Fantastic.
The presentation of blended inflation is not a technical matter.
Yeah, absolutely. But what are you then now doing as a CEO of a company when inflation, with the blended, we're now in hyperinflation, how are you calculating your accounts?
Okay.
What are you using?
Yeah, good. That's a controversial matter, but it requires the accountants. For us, for March of 20, up to the end of last year, we were using IS 29, International Accounting and Hyperinflation. For this year, we are taking a fee that we might want to account for books in US dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, and we use an internal rate. Right now, for example, since the introduction of the market rate, it's more straightforward. Because you've got the twice or three times auction rate fits the definition of a spot rate. So you can actually, you can convert your figures by the monthly average to US dollars. It's easier to understand.
If it's sustained for 12 months.
No, the spot rate can be...
No, what I mean is the auction.
Yeah, if it's as I said, as of now, yeah. Before that, we were using the market rate as measured by our own purchases, the invoice, derived rate for the business.
Right. Tell me, who's the target market for Zimstats? Internally, when they're producing these numbers, who are they targeting? Who are they saying, okay, this is our typical market, and this is...
Well, Zimstats produce many things. Are you just talking about inflation or about all the...
GDP...
Okay.
So GDP inflation numbers.
Okay.
The more broader...
GDP, the citizens don't care about GDP. It's more about economic planners, business leaders, and all that.
Yeah.
Inflation, the citizens worry about it because it talks prices.
Yes.
So the target, in my view, is the citizens. If it is inflation, ordinary citizens, they need to know that from last month, this month, what is how much things increased.
Fantastic.
And it's often used to determine whether or not people are earning real wages.
Yeah.
Because the unions want to try, if it's possible, to maintain their wages in real terms.
Absolutely.
So inflation is a much more widely used figure by the citizen than GDP, which is more about economic planning.
Okay. Then the question then that arises is you have a particular number, for example. The census numbers showed us that the number of households that we have is actually 3.8 million. And there were, it sounds like there's a lot of controversy around the census numbers, right? And I'm just giving one number. And then there's controversy around the 15 million people. Now, I've done back testing. I seem to believe those numbers. But a lot of people seem to doubt the statistical numbers, especially the census numbers. If you were to talk directly to the public to have confidence in the numbers that are coming out of Zimstats, what would you say to the public?
Okay, fine. I love the subject of the census because I led I was the chairman of Zimstats when we did the 2012 census. The last one I was now out of the board. So the census is a very accurate process. There is no need to change numbers or doctor them. It helps no one. Because the purpose of the census is not political or about votes and all that is people want to think. You are just counting people. And why it's accurate is people are counted by people that they know. So if you are in Mureo counting people, you take teachers and you are demanding from the local schools, they count their neighbors.
Okay.
If you are in Mutoko, the same. If you are in Nkai, the same. And you just go by household, how many people slept here, and you get the numbers and add them up. So when you look at the progression of the census from 1982 to now, in the fertility rate, in the average number of maternities for women of childbearing age, the indications are very accurate.
Okay. So then it's the interpretation, because if Zimstats...
Now let's talk about households.
Yeah, Zimstats is saying 3.8, but government-owned Ministry of Agriculture, is saying Pungudza covers 3.5 million households, rural households. That's not in tandem with what Zimstats is saying.
Yeah, you need to be careful. In terms of the Statistics Act, the authority for releasing statistics lies with Zimstats. Whether it's the maize harvested, whether it's the people doing food, you should go and look at Zimstats will have those figures, but a politician can go on the podium and give information. That's not official statistics. If you're talking about official statistics, they have all those things: livestock survey, demographic health survey, the crop index, the volume of manufacturing, all that. All the economic indicators are there in Zimstats. So I wouldn't bother myself worried about what a politician said at a rally.
Okay.
But that is not official statistics.
All right. Okay.
Get that very clearly. It's not official statistics.
What's your response to that?
No, I think it's fantastic.
I think it's fantastic.
The Zimstats, apart from when it's censured by politicians, actually does a great job, and they produce numbers that I think are reliable and make sense. I have a question though, because it speaks to a debate I have with Tinashe all the time about the GDP numbers. You know, about what's happening, whether the economy is growing or shrinking. And if you look at, particular sets of data, like Delta's sales volumes, for example, they're at record highs, right? And, that's a good proxy for aggregate demand, but the Tinashes of this world will tell you that, no, look, the economy is actually struggling. It's not doing well. It's more likely shrinking than growing. So you're a man who's steeped in statistics and data. What's your view? Do you think that it's possible that a big portion of the Zimbabwean economy, because it's informal, because it's US dollar cash, is not captured by the GDP numbers, and we could actually be in an economy that's growing and doing well, but it doesn't filter into the official numbers?
Okay, thanks. I think Zimstats does consider the informal sector. They consider that it's not as accurate as they would want. But by empirical evidence, even on simple random sampling, you can tell that the economy is growing. Is it growing evenly? Maybe not. Some people are getting bigger growth than others. But just if you look at the indicators, for example, you talked about Delta, but I'll talk about fuel consumption. There was an increase from about 2 billion liters to 3.5 billion liters between 2021 and 2022.
Because this is gone. No, so we need to use a lot
no,
more fuel.
It's about cars, especially it's about generators.
No, people aren't firing up generators more.
I will come to this.
Supermarkets. But we're not being anecdotal. Let's stick to...
But the fuel is a big data point.
Gentlemen, let's stick to...
Is the economy growing or not? No,
using Zimstats.
Okay.
Using Zimstats is very clear. GDP numbers for 2022, the GDP for 2022 is exactly the GDP of Zim in 2018. So they've given us in Zim dollars, and when you look at it at constant prices, when you look at 12 trillion, what we are now considering 12 trillion economy in Zim dollars, when you look at it from 2018, it's exactly the same value. And World Bank has also affirmed it, that it's a $20 billion economy. So World Bank Zimstats is very clear. Now the question of whether informal, I actually agree with you that I think Zimstats is actually doing a good job because they give us 3 ways in which they calculate GDP.
Yeah.
They use the income.
Yes.
They use the expenditure.
Yes.
And they use the
revenue.
Yes.
Tax.
So it's very clear.
Yeah.
Now our interpretation, and I tend to agree with you, that it's uneven growth. So there are certain sectors that are doing phenomenally well. There's no doubt that mining is doing very well. And we also know that mining is doing very well because...
The commodity prices are higher.
No, not just that. They get taxed an extraordinary tax. That's a requirement of 20,
and
25%. And they're still producing. Right? That tells you that the economy is doing very well because anywhere else. On consumption of fuel, you might be correct. And it could be an impact.
But how would you explain such a significant increase in the consumption of fuel?
Yeah. Well, there's also the arbitrage. That is the only sector where you can purely use US dollars.
But what do you do with it? All that you understand, arbitration is there for the people who are trading it, but the consumption is not. There's no arbitration. It's consumed by someone. That thing is used somewhere. So the issues, and if you look at the number of cars coming into the country, which is another problem. Again, our priorities as a nation, where we spend the money. We spend nearly 400 million importing grey cars every year.
What the diaspora plays a big part in that.
It doesn't matter, yes.
If there's a transport problem and my mom is using transport problem and I'm in the UK, I would rather...
Exactly. So your money is also counted in the growth of the economy.
Absolutely.
So that the issues... Yeah. So Zimstats, what I can say for them with a straight face is that Zimstats does not cook figures.
Okay.
And they are very amenable. I actually once had a call from some stakeholders. They were pleasantly surprised. I said to the DG, Mr. Mahonde, there are people who won't understand how you do these things. I said, we really love that. How do we meet them?
Okay. All right, so we should invite them over and then we then...
Yes,
specifically...
The other thing about census again, we had issues with government towards the end of our term when the census dates were changed because the census, it became a political matter. It's supposed to be done every 10 years. This one was done 9 2/3 years after the last one. By international standards, you shouldn't tamper with that. Because our data feeds into the global population calculation. And it's checked by the other people in the International Statistics Association. So, but if the difference is not more than 6 months, it can be allowed. But initially, as a board, we said to the minister, we don't believe this is a great idea.
Okay.
Let's say if the census at the due time, then they said no, there won't be enough time to do delimitation and do the elections.
That's an important point.
Yeah. So you will find that most of the figures in Zimstats are what they obtain from their surveys, and they do them regularly. By the way, inflation is not the same for all provinces or districts.
Yes, they now break it
it's
down.
Granular.
Yeah.
So, and one of the problems we do have sometimes that each individual forget that they've got their own inflation index. So if the basket that Zimstats uses, which is a standard basket for a standard family, is not the same as yours, you say their figure is inaccurate. And for most of the people in this part of town, that is the other problem. The goods that you buy in your basket are not the ones that are being used to calculate inflation. So the numbers are going to be the same.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to move on. Thank you for that. That was very enlightening. And we would want to have...
Yeah, there was one matter that I saw some of the questions that were coming to us about whether or not people are moving from rural to urban. I want to address that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Because it's about Zimstats.
Yes.
Zimbabwe, like any other country, is rural to urban migration. But it's increasing at a decreasing rate. Okay. I hope you understand what that means.
Yeah.
Because the job opportunities in the urban areas of Zimbabwe are not very high. So there is a mixture of movement in the urban areas and some movement in the rural areas for those who are seeking opportunities in agriculture. Yeah. So because all our farms are classified as rural, you will find that in the Intercensual Demographic Survey of 2017, leading the 2018 election, Zimbabwean classified as rural was 68.3%. In the census of 2022, it's now 62%.
Yeah, 61 point.
Yeah. So it tells you that there's indeed a rural urban migration, but it's not as high as what many people imagine, especially when they think about it politically.
The other, I think, it has less to do with Zimstats, but it's government definitions. For example, Caledonia is still classified as rural.
Yeah, exactly, it's a definition.
When it actually, in effect, it's not.
It's a definition, and you have some certain growth points.
Exactly.
Yeah, that you would think that they are now small towns. They are still classified as rural.
Yeah.
Some of the mining towns are also classified as rural, but the surrounding rural areas. So, but the Zimstats does not tamper with that.
Okay. I think the real question that I would love to have them on the show, and it's the debate that we have, is on the informalization of the economy, whether GDP captures an informalized economy.
Yeah.
Because I think that one is
that's an important one, to agree with you. Yeah. You know what is called microdata. You can go in the details. The Zimstats is very closely works with the World Bank.
Yes.
So at one time, the laws was about not allowed the use of microdata on tax returns, which is one of the biggest ways of calculating GDP. So we had to go through the process of anonymizing it and giving it as micro. So the first process is called anonymization. That you don't know who this person is. But the Zebra Act does not allow you to divulge that. So once it was anonymized, microdata was released, it improved the calculation of GDP. So I think that in the informal sector, there's a lot of improvement that could be done to calculate the GDP.
Well, also, okay, let's not get into that because time is running.
But is the producer jumping up and down?
It's an exciting thing because I would love us to get in But what I want to get into is, because you're a man of varied talents, and because we have you here, it's also interesting for us to discuss some matters that you were intricately involved in. So the first one is FML with Timber Trust Bank saga in the 90s. Were the issues the same? Does it say anything about black-owned banks? What do you think happened there?
Okay, so I think the tragedy of what happened to our emerging bankers was just a lack of discipline. To me, Rufaron was, we were in the trenches together, where you got to the exercise of shared responsibility over depositors and so on, and also the need for quick success without going through the process. I think that's the tragedy, and the regulators were also not doing their job, especially in the banking sector.
Okay.
Yes, that is my thinking. The individuals, give it to them. I think they're brilliant business people, but they were coming in from the cold, if you may use that. So there was need for either a measure of self-discipline, that's not very common, but a significantly important measure of regulatory discipline to be applied. So my issues with those guys, at First Mutual, for example, can talk about it quite freely.
Yeah,
it was a difference of views on how to treat the trust assets. The same ones we were talking about earlier, policyholder funds. Can you just do what you want? The answer is no. We were very supportive of a lot of the initiatives, but we would want to make sure that we are balancing the interests of all the stakeholders. And I was very adamant that I would not do things that I think are in line with how I look at it ethically in my public interest duty, in terms of looking after the interests of others who cannot be there.
What are your views on Gono and what he did? Because there's an argument that Trust, for example, had GMB bills, and a lot of other banks had assets.
I think I will not want to comment about individuals because that is too personal.
Okay.
But I think that there was some inconsistent treatment of matters along the way. I was a director of Trust Holdings, so I know about some of the matters myself.
Yeah.
So, in one of my uninteresting meetings was to be chased out of a meeting for raising a point of view. Because by the nature of a troubled bank, if you still hope to make it recover, you cannot give it a penal interest rate.
True.
It's actually against the Troubled Banks Act.
Yeah, we've seen that in America and everywhere else.
I did raise that point and I was chased out of a meeting for trying to say something about that. So I think there was a mixture of personal differences, power games, you name it. Some of it is not good for public consumption.
Well, that's why we're doing this Friday drinks. No one takes us seriously, so we can have this conversation.
So I think it could have been better both sides.
Okay.
If there was some restraint, and if there was a focus on saying, let's not kill the goose that lays the golden egg, because we just have differences over some other matters that we can quietly resolve. I don't think all was a disaster. All those guys who had exposures at the banks, yes, they were coming from the cold, but they did a lot of innovative things for the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we got to give it to them. And so the punishment, in my view, was too severe. You must always look at discipline from two ways. One, to say that it's corrective, not destructive. This became destructive retribution, if you like. And as we speak today, we don't have one indigenous bank standing.
Absolutely.
In the entire economy.
And also the financial services sector is now suffering from some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
There's lack of innovation.
It couldn't be that all those bankers should have failed if there was an effort to save some of them. That is my considered view.
Okay. And then there's the obvious one that we talk about, that we have an enviable point right now in the country where you have the PEMSEC is a former banker, where you have the Minister of Finance is a former banker.
Former owner of a bank.
Owner of a bank, where you have the Governor of the Reserve Bank is a former banker. Yeah. And yet the banking sector has shrunk. If you look at loans and advances, it's now $1.3 billion. why is the banking sector shrinking when it has formidable bankers in charge of policy?
That's a policy issue. Clearly, it's squarely between the central bank and the treasury.
Okay. Then
Because right now, no, let me carry on.
Okay.
If you want to lend money in US dollars, there's the 25 December 2025
Deadline.
what do you call a gauge. You can't cross that gauge. And you know that in financing projects of value, 2 years is a short period.
Yeah.
So what can the banks do? The banks will be accused by, as the insurance companies being accused of losing depositors' funds if there's another change. So what is required? I said, you don't need this step function. We need a consistency. If that structural instrument had been made a 5-year into an act of parliament, a law, 5-10 years, guess what? Would be having mortgage bonds again.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say there? I agree with that.
Yeah, look, I think that's one of our challenges on the policy front, where we have created a macroeconomic environment that's very difficult for the banks to do business. But a part of me, feels that the bankers themselves ought to bear some of the blame for where they found themselves, because they did not speak out in 2016 when I think it was an epic ethical failure on their part, because they knew that those bank balances were no longer US dollars. Yep. They could see the writing on the wall, but they didn't tell their customers. They didn't warn depositors. They didn't speak out against what the central bank was doing to debase those bank balances. Mm-hmm. And the reason why the National Mattress Bank is doing so well is because the banks and the bankers shot themselves in the foot.
Abrogate their duty. Okay. Another question here is, First Mutual survived the carnage that happened in 2002. Would you like to share with us some nuggets of wisdom, how you guys survived and how you survived?
Okay, so the First Mutual, by the way, is not the largest insurance company in Zimbabwe by premium income.
Oh, you're bigger than Old Mutual now.
Yes,
well done.
If we add all our premiums. Mm-hmm. But the essence of it is even the way it's run today. Mm-hmm. We feel that in the insurance sector, the risk profiles are different between the various categories. General insurance, which is your property and casualty, health, life, pensions, reinsurance. So one of the first things I did when I was hired by First Mutual from Old Mutual was create new businesses to diversify from being a life company only. When I got into First Mutual, it was First Mutual Life Insurance Society. And out of it, we created the trust, which is known as Diamond, First Mutual Insurance, First Mutual Health. And so the fortunes of those sectors of insurance are different, and the cycle of claims and profits are different. So your objective is to end up with a stable, what we call a steady state average, a smooth flow of risk and profit. And that's how First Mutual survives. So if you take, for example, the current difficulties, we have a good mixture of Zim dollar and US dollar business by the nature of our products.
All right.
Coming from the short-term insurance quickly dollarize, doesn't waste time. Mm-hmm. The long-term insurance takes time to dollarize, but it is the longer-term value. The health is half, it's a halfway house, it's half-half. So when you look at the First Mutual revenue today, it's about 55% in pure US dollars. Wow. And 45% in Zim dollars. Okay. So you create an element of stability. The Zim dollars are traded internally first to balance the internal equation. And our CFO is good at that. All right. Then if we have excess of them, we have a policy of not investing in monetary assets. We then go and buy real estates, roads, invest buildings, and all that. That has kept us going up to now. Okay. And you will see that on our results, you don't see lots of variability because of that.
So one of the things that's remarkable about FML is that you've got businesses outside Zim. And one of the things that we discuss on the show quite often is how Zimbabwean business people tend to be inward looking.
Yes.
So they will have a competency and build a successful, profitable business in Zim, which if they apply their minds, they could probably replicate in Africa, outside South Africa, because the South African market is particularly difficult and competitive. But
No, it's
you know,
tough.
Zimbabwe is very similar to Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique.
Uganda.
And so, why do you think that business leaders tend to be inward looking, and why did you look outside Zim?
Okay, yeah, good. Thanks, Dan. Good. I think you should recall, in the banking sector, they actually tried before 2003, 2004 to go out of Zimbabwe. The problem was with the model. They would set a head office first before they had a business. So they started with the expenses. So the thinking was the Kingdom, Trust, Century. They tried to go into the region, but the model was wrong. It was front-loaded with costs. Even some of our companies that were in the region, they start with thinking of the management to want to have an offshore account that becomes the driving factor instead of creating a business there. So we felt that we could do business in the region. We looked at Botswana, we looked at Mauritius. We felt that Mauritius was a bit competitive and a bit too complicated regulatory-wise, and we chose Botswana. And we went in there and said, we'll start with a very small team, build a business. The management, senior management will remain in Zimbabwe. They can go there to see what's going on. They can monitor it. And that's the model that we believe works, because
That's a very good point.
yeah, so it was a low cost end for management expenses. And then we also noted that a number of the problems with some of our colleagues, I won't mention them, in the insurance sector who first went to the regions, that they never capitalized their businesses. They would go there and have a sick child in a foreign market. So we decided in 2012 to say, if the regulator wants 400,000 capital, we want to put 5 times of that.
All right.
So we went in with 2 million years into Botswana, which was way above the minimum requirement. And when I did the rounds talking to the cedents to give us business, I showed them the balance sheet. I said, we are new. Give us a small part of your portfolio and watch us perform. On service and settlement, that is our message too. They were skeptical, but they bichan. After a while, they were all now coming. And that capital grew from 2 million to 6, 7, 8 million, including dividends coming to Zimbabwe. If you took the RBZ, they were saying to us one of the days, you're one of the few companies that does the compliance with the quarterly returns, management services fees, dividends, coming back to the source of the money. So I think that the managers, some of them lack exposure from leadership training. I had the fortune of working for Old Mutual. I was even working in Cape Town, and I was involved with the London guys when they were going to London. So I got a perspective of international business, and I now deliberately do at First Mutual that all the chosen people in the top talent must get international training, and we pay for it.
Oh, fantastic. That's good to hear. And that's a very teachable moment on how businesses in Zim can actually scale into the region. That's something that we are actually considerably encouraging.
Yeah, and I think
lot of our
actually
businesses.
when we look at Zimbabwe financial sector is fairly developed compared to the rest of Africa. Never mind our problems. In the culture issues, which we do better than South Africans from a culture point of view. If you go into Zambia, even if you go into Nigeria or somewhere, they are more amenable to dealing with the Zimbabwean than South African culturally.
That's true. In line with the teachable moments, you again sit on the UZ, Peter House, and Arundel boards. Education is a passion of yours. Would you just like to explain what you think of our education system in Zim, on the boards that you sit, you know, somewhat 2 or 3 things that you think are the things that you try and push as much as possible when you're sitting?
Okay. I think education is at the core in its full definition, from pedagogy to technical skills. I have a concern about the public education system insofar as up to Form 6 we're just pushing people through instead of having options that at Form 4 particularly we need to branch people into competencies of production.
Like apprenticeship.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Even diploma level people, not necessarily, not everyone must have a degree, but more so trades.
That's true.
Because if you look at this economy, it needs to grow through production, mining, manufacturing, agriculture. We need artisans in those areas, and also artisans are easier to convert into business spaces than people with university degrees.
Absolutely.
Because their expectation of what should happen in life is a little bit more practical. So that is my main concern on the national scale. In terms of my role is at the Invest, I'm the chairman of the Invest Council. We are guided by the policy blueprint Education 5.0, whose effort is what they've talked about. 5.0 is trying to say people must be educated to solve problems and provide solutions and make services and products available to our people, not just to pass some theoretical stuff. There was significant resistance from the older members of staff in the universities to move from 3.0 education to 5.0 education. For example, if you take sociology, which is now called criminology, it was being put into context. You need to understand the minds of criminals, and you can go to do attachment at a prison. The content is the same, but it's been customized to be of some use to society. The academics didn't like it. They're coming along reluctantly, but they did like it. In terms of private schools, the private schools give a very top-notch for few education. So that's a privileged class. I happened to be there because my kids were part of the system.
Okay.
But from a national ethos, the contribution of private schools to total education is negligible, if you like.
Sure. So what can we do as far as the education system in Zimbabwe is concerned?
I think we should do, instead of continuing to build universities, we should convert some of them into vocational training centers, polytechnics, and encourage industries to train people, pay them, because they used to be paid for training apprentices.
That's true.
The National Manpower Development Fund must actually pay companies for them to create more capacity for training artisans. Even if they don't employ them after the 3 years, they can go and employ themselves. They've done metal work, they've done plant fitting, they've done this. So I think we could direct more energy in that direction from an ethos of education point of view.
Do you think it makes sense for the vast majority of our education infrastructure to be run directly by the government, as opposed to just offloading a lot of the properties to
community schools,
to independent operators? You know, let the parents run the place on a cost recovery basis. Why do we have all these schools on the government's portfolio, running them? Because I could be wrong, but my take is that one of the reasons why the outcomes are not great in public education is because it's public education. it's so the people who have skin in the game are the parents. They actually care deeply about the outcomes, right? So they will be much more productive in terms of their engagement with the school if they have a say than a bureaucrat in a nice air-conditioned office who never visits the school, whose kids go to private school.
Okay, I think it's a model that many countries have adopted. But if you look at the way our country is structured, certainly in the urban areas, there's a problem in that the government took a view that they want to do everything for everybody. I would disagree with that. So a school in Mount Pleasant can cost more than a school in Focus. There's nothing wrong with that. And the people who want to go to that school must pay for it.
Absolutely.
Even if the government says this is our building, they were doing it well when they were doing what was called zoning. You remember?
Yes. True.
Zoning meant that you could only learn in a school within a certain radius of where you live. That meant that community will have some common interests. They can decide on how to maintain their things, how much they charge each other, and so on. It became, I think, it's a political matter, where the government feels that if that happens, you might end up with a creation of another class of citizens who have their own views that may not necessarily agree with the government.
But it's actually happening, and it's very costly, because now you have these schools that don't have the infrastructure that Borodo Primary School, for example, has. Instead of encouraging Bordo Primary School to be a community-led school. It has the infrastructure. Now it's competing with these private
With the home-based schools.
home-based schools. So they're actually creating.
In fact, by the way, even the top private schools don't have as much infrastructure as the government schools.
Absolutely.
It's just that it's in better state of repair.
That's true.
If you go to Gormont today, the 1946 school is still as good as it was 70 years ago.
Absolutely.
You just need to maintain it. And there is no private investor who can put so much money in infrastructure like the government did. So yes, I think there could be methods. Then you have to say what you do in the rural areas. So that's why you should go to other countries. They have models. The rural people also have a keen interest on the outcome for their kids. So if you give them the opportunity, they will deal with it in their own way.
Absolutely.
So I would agree with that. It's a paradigm shift that must occur within the planning authority. And then if the government wants to subsidize targeted communities, then they have the leeway to do that.
Or they can just subsidize the students.
Yeah.
So rather than subsidize the school, they subsidize.
Yeah. So there could be ways of looking at that. Yes, definitely.
Fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
So producer
that's all
jumping
the
up and
time.
down.
That's all the time. We've actually done an hour 30 minutes.
Okay.
It goes by.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh yeah, no, it does. But this was very extensive. We learned a lot.
For
There's
sure.
A number of things, and I hope that we have addressed, especially Judge Smith Commission and their report, because there were a lot of questions around that, and I hope that we've addressed that. I hope we've addressed Zimstats, but we hope to have Zimstats so that we deal with the informal sector, because there are lots of
I
debates
think they'll
around
be
that.
very happy to engage.
That, and then we dealt with the school, we dealt with the banking sector, and a teachable moment, how businesses in Zimbabwe can actually go into the region. And I thought that was very useful. Thank you very much. This was, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thank you.
How
Yeah,
was
I'm
your
also-
Zambezi?
Yeah, it's getting warm, but nice.
Fantastic. Have yourself a wonderful evening. We're going to have a lovely evening. And yeah, enjoy your weekend. Keep the comments coming. Let's have the discussion. This is important for our country and for ourselves as well. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.